Good afternoon or morning, everyone. We are grateful to have you here. We have Delight today, supervisor at Lifespan, who still won't give up being a coordinator for a couple of teams. Allison Granata does amazing work at Lifespan. She's been there for several years, 12,
16,
16,
yeah.
16 years, and has been in this work for quite some time. So we're grateful to have her here. I'll let her tell you a little bit more about what she does and how we can look at getting justice in various forms for our the clients that our case review teams see. If you could click through, Allison, so we could get to the next little slides. I think everyone is pretty good with their names and things of that sort. And mute and all that kind of stuff. We're gonna throw stuff in the chat if you have questions, and we'll get to them as we can. And you can send me a note if you need something. Marty got us started and had to jump off. Okay, Allison, keep going. You want to introduce yourself and share what you'd like?
Yeah, sure. So as Lisa said, I'm Allison Granata and I'm stubborn and I will not give up coordinating some of my E-MDTs here in the Finger Lakes region and New York State. And so I'll get into a little bit more of that, but I have been here at Lifespan for about 16 or 17 years now. I've lost track, to be honest. But I've been coordinating E-MDTs and overseeing the statewide expansion of the multidisciplinary teams, the E-MDTs in New York State, since 2012, 2013, when we received our initial grant funding. So I'll share more about that in just a minute. Lisa, do you have a preference if I go through each learning objective one by one, or? Okay, these are the learning objectives. But really, I wanted to just have an opportunity to talk about what the, kind of where I started with this and the different ways that my teams have identified the ability to recover funds, whether it's through restitution or whatnot. So I'll be kind of touching base on that now. So this is a quick then and now of the New York State E-MDT Initiative. Sorry, I have to minimize the square so I can see my full screen. So we started back in 2012, 2013 with a pilot project. We had 7 counties in the Finger Lakes region that I coordinated all 7. I initiated and coordinated all 7 teams back then. And then during our pilot project, we also had funding for Center for Elder Abuse Solutions, at that time, the New York City Elder Abuse Center, and they were doing the Manhattan E-MDT. And so due to the success that we noticed across the state and across our region, we started to be able to expand across the state. So then you see kind of what we are now here in New York State. And so what we have created is this hub region where the state is broken into 11 separate regions, where Lifespan is the fiduciary, and we fund 13 agencies across New York State to coordinate and implement the E-MDTs throughout New York State. And so we have 18 coordinators that are covering all 62 counties in New York State. So we're talking about getting money back, right? Kind of the show me the money. I know it's tongue in cheek. I know it kind of makes it a little Jerry Maguire-ish, but I wanted to just share kind of a little bit of our data for the state. And this is specific to civil judgments and agreements, as well as criminal restitution orders. And so our first restitution order was in 2014. Just to give you an idea, the first case that I heard was in May of 2013. And so it took, I would say, over a year before we got our first restitution order for one of our cases. Since 2014, we've seen over $6 million of or ordered or agreed upon restitution, which is a pretty exciting number. We try to keep track of this annually. And then how much funds we know has been returned to the victims. We know that there's been over $1 million or over $1.5 million that's been returned to victims thus far. And so we'll talk a little bit more about how I keep track of those numbers, how we do that a little bit later in the presentation. So those numbers are fantastic, and they can be slightly intimidating, because I know when I was first doing this, it's like, but how do I get the numbers? How do I make this happen? So I wanted to just show you a quick screenshot of what it looked like when I first started. And so looking at the first 5 years, because I know a lot of you are in the earlier stages of your development. And so just so you don't think that it's like we immediately started with millions of dollars, I'll be honest, in 2014, I got pretty lucky in Ontario County. We had a lot of different successful cases. We had a very engaged prosecutor who was very aggressive with, she would not let a judgment go through without an order of restitution if there were funds that were lost. And so she was a fantastic partner in that. So our first year, we did have a high dollar amount of $515,000, but then in 2015, we had $60,000. And then in 2016, we had $203,000. And then in 2017, that's when we started our statewide expansion. So you'll start to see some additional counties being added. We had $335,000. So my point in sharing this is really just that it really does go up and down. It is, as a coordinator, I don't actually have any control over it happening. What I do have control over is being able to facilitate some of that discussion with my team members. So we'll talk a little bit more about that, but I just wanted you all to see that as well. So it's not just looking at a $6 million number. So this feels pretty obvious, right? The benefits of recovering funds. So I don't mean to sound condescending or anything, but of course there's the financial relief. There's the emotional validation of the fact that something did actually happen. If someone is able to get some funds back, it feels like a level of proof. There's some type of dignity and control that they were able to have something happen. Housing stability has been a big thing that we've seen in a lot of our cases, is that with some of our situations, the individual was able to remain where they were living or able to afford a safer living option because of the funds that we were able to recover. And so that was just, the housing stability has been a big piece that we have seen, as well as accessing services and care. Of course, like if somebody was in need of home care, maybe they didn't have to go to a nursing home because they then had those funds that had been stolen. They now had access to be able to use those funds on their actual needs. And regaining a small piece of normalcy, like buying your bananas. And that is from a specific case that I had, which was really, this is where that quick tip, every penny counts. A lot of people struggle with thinking about it has to be a certain dollar amount in order to be worthwhile to get some funds back. This person had, it was like 700 some odd dollars that was stolen from her. And what she missed most was her ability to go to the store and buy her bananas. And that is what was most important to her. And so that is what we wanted to try to help facilitate for her, was let's see if we can assist with getting it back to her being able to buy her own bananas. And we were successfully able to do that through law enforcement engagement. They did not end up prosecuting because the perpetrator was willing to pay full restitution for the amount that she had stolen. And then the client was able to go and purchase her bananas. So I always think of that because it feels so small. It feels so like bananas are what, like 41.52 cents or something like that. Like we all probably, does the code actually change at the grocery store from state to state? I don't know, but it seems so small, but it was such an important piece. And for this woman, and it was a case from, I think, 2014 or 2015 for me. And it's just made such a lasting impact that was the impact that being able to obtain some of these funds had for her. And then of course, there are some like some benefits to your team, the people that you're bringing together that are contributing to these cases. It's an impactful number. I actually had to ask some colleagues for a word because I couldn't think of anything. I'm like, it's the number that like makes people like excited. It sizzles. It's like the sexy number that people they want to know that there's money going back because that feels like justice to them. And none of those felt quite appropriate to put in a PowerPoint. So impactful and enticing was where I landed. But it is something that makes people feel like there is it's that motivating factor, that there is something that came of the work that we did in this discussion. It's also a great number to track so that you can work towards sustainability. One of the reasons that I had that previous chart, this one that I had shown before and I'm showing you again, is that when my CEO was going around and trying to advocate for additional funds, this was the number that people wanted to know. They wanted to know what has come of this, what has come of these cases that have been discussed. And we could show them, you know, X% had this or this, but this number seemed to be the most impactful, especially with legislators. So what are some of the fund recovery options we'll touch base on today? One is criminal restitution, one is civil judgments, another is informal agreements, and then another is crime victim compensation. Sorry, am I okay to keep going?
Yeah, you're good.
Okay. All right, so criminal restitution. The way that I'll kind of go over these again, I think people understand or at least know what these things are, but I kind of put some of the tips that I have used as a coordinator as to how I have facilitated some of this or things that I've kept in mind while I've been looking at these things. So with criminal restitution, it's something that's ordered by the court as part of a sentence or a plea deal. So some of the things to keep in mind is don't be afraid with your team members or with your district attorney's office to ask that question. Is it an option for any restitution for this victim? That is helpful to put in their mind that this is something that could or should be pursued. It's also really helpful to know for them, like for the district attorney, what is that person looking for? And so again, like with the banana example, they were looking for the ability she was looking for the ability to have access to her funds and get her bananas. So always ask that question and don't be afraid to ask it, because although it may be obvious, I'll say that it's not. Sometimes they do need to be reminded that this is something, even if it's a financial case, a lot of people do naturally think of it, but it does not always come to mind, or people may not be comfortable with it. So one of the case examples I wanted to share with everybody is I had a case in one of my smaller counties that was more rural. It was, honestly, this case turned into it was one of those cases I wish I could have recorded because the team discussion was beautiful. This team, I got very lucky. I was the instrument to basically allow them to work their magic. They just needed somebody to arrange the meeting, to host the meeting, to get everyone together. And it did not take a ton of effort for this group to start to feed off of each other. And this was an individual who was living in her home and her niece was living with her. And there was over $275,000 that through a forensic accounting review was identified that was stolen by the niece. And so there were a lot of concerns with this, because she needed some additional help in the home. The niece was the primary caregiver. So what happens when she would get arrested? And also, how do the victim did not want to go into a nursing home. Her goal was to be able to stay in her home. And so we were able as a team to come together, and this individual, the law enforcement investigator, was like, okay, so I'm getting very close to an arrest. However, I remember at a previous meeting, somebody said that the niece provides the transportation if she has doctor's appointments. So do we know if she has doctor's appointments coming up before I make this arrest? Which this man is now sheriff. I fully support that. I love that he became sheriff, because that sort of thinking was what made me so excited. But he was able to, through this conversation, it's not something he would have known before going out and doing that arrest. And so there was a chance that previously we could have just left her without anything. But through this conversation, we were able to support, get her connected with our Office for the Aging or our AAA, and make the appropriate arrangements so that when the niece was arrested, that the appropriate level of care was still provided to the victim. Let's be honest, it's not like the niece stayed in jail, but we weren't sure if she would be going back to the home or not. Through the through the prosecution process, I actually received a call from the assistant district attorney that was working on the case, and he was like, so here's the thing, this is my first big financial case. How much restitution should I order? And I'm like, looking over my shoulder, I'm like, I mean, do you know who you're calling right now? Because in my head, I'm like, I didn't expect you to call the social worker to ask that question. Again, with this case, we were lucky enough to have a forensic accounting. And I said, if it were me, I would put in what the forensic accounting report identified. However, if you'd like, I can, reach out to another one of my contacts, because I was coordinating multiple counties. So we were able to connect with somebody else who, because part of his concern was that even if he put a number in there, how would she be able to pay it back? So they ended up getting really creative with this sentencing. Basically, what they established was, because the victim's overall goal was to be able to stay in her home, and the niece was providing, for the most part, the appropriate level of care. There was just a little bit additional support that was newly needed. The agreement was that there was the full amount of restitution was ordered. However, as long as the niece remained in the home, and as long as the niece continued to provide the appropriate level of care, our Adult Protective Services unit became guardian, so there was still eyes on them, that she did not have to make payments towards the restitution. And so this was another kind of creative way that we were able to address both the need to, one of the things the ADA had said to me when he called is, my DA will shove this back in my face if I try to put this through without any type of dollar on here. And so it kind of met both needs of being able to show, this is the amount that was stolen, this is what's owed to her, and as long as she's providing this care. And so again, I find that in some of my more rural, smaller counties is where we get the most creative, but this was a great kind of solution to be able to figure out what worked best for the victim, and also what was law enforcement and the DA's office's kind of needs and desires based off of the case that they had seen. So a couple of other quick tips when you're looking at criminal restitution is to identify how restitution is collected in each of your counties. I'll be honest, I don't know if it's the same from state to state, but for us, it's collected through probation here in New York State. And so when I was trying to find out how much had been repaid on a certain account, I was contacting the local probation offices to do that. Some other things that just kind of keep in mind as you're thinking about these is, if the suspected perpetrator is going to jail or prison, what was ordered for when the repayment would begin. For one of my cases, we had it set up so that there were no payments made during while the individual was in prison. However, it was 6 months after they left prison was when payments started on the restitution. And so if you are able and planning to collect any of the how much has been returned, that's just helpful information to know. And then the other thing is to consider looking into VineLink. I'm not sure if any of you are using this, but it's something that I like to, any of my perpetrators that end up going to prison or jail, I like to sign up for. Primarily, it is so that if and when they are released, I'm able to give the caseworker who is working with that individual a heads up so that they might be able to implement any interventions. But it's also helpful on the restitution end. If I know that 6 months after they're released, they're supposed to start making payments, then I can kind of be a pest about that sometimes. So the next thing I'm going to touch base on is civil judgment. So This is when the victim is suing the suspected perpetrator through civil court for financial losses. They're also able to, through civil court, civil judgment versus criminal restitution, they may be able to pursue additional damages. One of the barriers that we see across this is the cost of hiring a civil attorney. We have been very, very lucky with our New York State funding, in that we have funding that we can, I can contract with a civil legal service provider in our area. And one of the individuals that we have is on top of his game. He is fantastic. He was actually able to set like a precedence in New York State based off of some digging he did through other states, so that the victim in one of our cases was awarded a $250,000 judgment. This was a case where the suspected perpetrator was the power of attorney agent for our victim. It was like a neighbor friend who was named, ended up kind of taking the house, taking the car, and taking, forgot what the total dollar amount was, but some of the $250 that was awarded was also for basically like pain and suffering because of a result of how this has been going. And so one of the things that I have found, especially with as we're trying to like onboard and engage with civil legal attorneys, is that it can be really hard for some of the civil legal attorneys aren't necessarily comfortable like going to court for things. You know, they prefer doing some more of the like behind the scenes work, or I'm sure there's a more legal term for this that I just don't know, but you know, some of the other aspects where in my mind, I'm thinking of more of the protective measures, like assisting with revoking the power of attorney and identifying a new one, and not necessarily going to court to pursue a civil case. And so one of the things that I would encourage people to do is to look for those opportunities where you can fund a civil legal service provider to explore cases, because of that barrier of the cost of hiring a civil attorney. When we think about the fact that with these cases that we're talking about, they have lost a majority, if not all of their funds, having to hire an attorney on top of that is often unrealistic. And so that's where we were able to kind of justify why we were including this funding for our funding stream. Some of the ways to find a civil attorney would be to identify who your local AAA is working with or recommends. Oftentimes it's like, who is that person that's ahead of the game? Who's the person that you would call for a quick question? And then again, it sounds so obvious, but just asking that direct question: is there an option for a civil suit? Is there an option for fund recovery? What does that look like? Being able to have somebody who could potentially provide some education regarding like small claims court versus, you know, doing this outside of small claims court, and just being able to learn and understand some of those things can be really helpful to facilitate some of those discussions, and oftentimes kind of provides that attorney the permission, if you will, to feel more comfortable in providing some of their insight, especially if they are somebody who might be a little bit more quiet when you're sitting at the table. Lisa, have there been any questions that have come in while I've been rambling?
Nope, we're good. Just giving you a 35-minute time check.
Okay, cool. Thank you. So informal agreements. I've used various names for this across the time, my 12 years of coordinating teams, but these are kind of the agreements that are used to potentially avoid an arrest, a trial, or a formal judgment. And it's often something that's negotiated between the victim or their representative and the suspected perpetrator. And so it's, maybe it's through mediation, maybe it's through, we had one case that went through law enforcement, ended up at the DA's office, and the perpetrator had stolen $100,000 from her mom. And this was a case where, as a result of that, the mom was living in like an assisted living type of level of care. And because that $100,000 was gone, it was going to significantly decrease how much time she could stay at her facility. Basically from making it like a few years to like you have 2 months left. And so this was another case where she obviously didn't want to move. She was at the point where she was so frustrated and angry at the fact that her daughter stole these funds that she was like, I don't care if she goes to jail. I don't care if she, you know, whatever, it doesn't matter. Like this shouldn't have happened. And through the work with our team, the DA's office ended up working with the perpetrator and basically said, if you repay these funds, then we won't move forward with trial. And so we'll take prison off the table. The perpetrator and her spouse, when about a month after she had stolen the funds, they both resigned from their jobs. They used the funds to pay off their mortgage of their house. And then in order to avoid arrest, they both are now employed and they have a new loan on their house. And so the victim was able to get a full check for $100,000. And actually the law enforcement investigator showed up at her apartment the day that the check arrived. And she was so thrilled. She asked him to take a picture with her and the check to send to her other daughter, because she was like, I get to stay, was the message that she wanted sent to her daughter, her other daughter. And so it was, you know, again, some of these informal agreements. We've also had these types of situations where we've had informal agreements with like a power of attorney who, well, the power of attorney was revoked throughout the process of the case, but the former agent, there was an agreement to repay funds that had been quote unquote mismanaged. I would call them stolen. But you know, some of the aspects would be just to think about that law enforcement or prosecutors may be more willing to explore this if it's an option that the victim wants. And so sometimes, again, it's that creativity, that feeling comfortable with having some of these conversations with law enforcement or prosecutors. But one of the things to keep in mind is that this is difficult to enforce. It's not necessarily a formal judgment where there's something signed, sealed, and delivered. And so you really want to think about the victim's safety. With the example that I gave you with the bananas, part of that was facilitated through law enforcement. And so in order to get the caseworker worked here at Lifespan. And so the suspected perpetrator actually came to Lifespan and provided, like, made 2 payments to the caseworker with law enforcement there because of the program that they had. But it was, so, you know, we weren't going to have the suspected perpetrator go directly to the victim because she didn't feel safe doing that. So one of the biggest things with all of these options, right, is that we need to know what dollar amount. We, being law enforcement, prosecutors, civil attorneys, whoever it is that you are trying to, you know, work with to regain some funds. And so there are a couple of ways to consider this. One is through forensic accounting. Again, I'm very lucky in New York State that I'm able to have some funding for forensic accounting. It is certainly something to keep in mind. I will share that one of the ways that we were able to develop a relationship with our forensic accountant was actually through a presentation that my former director had done it was his accountant was a professor at one of the local colleges, and his accountant knew that he did elder abuse work and the financial stuff came up a lot. So he wanted him to share this information with his students. And so he would go annually and share information about elder abuse to these accounting students. And as a result of that, once they started their forensic accounting program, they offered some volunteer time to do some of the work. They weren't able to testify, but the professor oversaw the work that was being done by the students. And so we were able to develop a great relationship that way. So just another way to get a little bit creative. Some of the other things to consider would be the technology support that's out there. There are multiple different programs. I, as a coordinator, when we originally started back in 2012, 2013, I had very limited dollars for my forensic accounting. And so I had to do a lot of the data entry myself as a coordinator. I really encourage every coordinator to do some data entry at some point, because I think it's one way that you start to get more comfortable and feel a little bit more familiar with some of the things that you might be seeing. However, I know that's not necessarily an option for everybody. So again, there is technology. That technology does cost money. I'm not going to pretend it doesn't, but just keep in mind that there are options out there. The forensic accountant that we work with actually developed a system called Fraud Finder. So that is one of the programs that I know is out there. And I know that there are other, they're called OCR, optical character reading or something like that, like software things that can do some of the data entry so that you can kind of export some of that data. Some of the other things to consider are, do you have team members who have an expertise or a passion in this? I found early on that there were some law enforcement investigators that I worked with that loved it. They came to meet with us and they had binders, they had, you know, charts already put together. And so there was already a lot of this information done, because prior to the E-MDT's existence, they didn't have access to a forensic accountant, so they were doing it on their own. And it's part of how they understood the case, it's part of how they grew to become most familiar with it. And so, you know, kind of keep an eye out, because they may have some tips and techniques that they may be able to share. And then again, the data entry, again, as a coordinator, I'm a social worker. I don't do numbers, but I do now. And I now know what a pivot table is. And it is surprising, if you haven't done one, it is shocking how easy it actually is. So that can be another 5-minute webinar. So see here. So the last kind of area I wanted to share was just about crime victim compensation. So every state does have a crime victim compensation program. So it's, you know, state administered funds that are eligible for victims. So one of the biggest things that I would say is to identify who in your community can do these applications for and with victims, and get to know they are a great resource. One of the things that I found, at least in New York State, is that it is a fantastic resource that's available, but a lot of people aren't necessarily comfortable doing the applications or feel confident doing the applications. And so when we find the people who are, specifically in regards to the financial recovery aspect. And so when we find the people that we are, I'm trying to really develop that relationship, so that I can understand what are some of those challenges and barriers that they are up against. And then how can I, as a coordinator, utilize the team discussion to try to see if we can address any of those challenges and barriers. Like, you know, making sure maybe with one of the things in New York State is that you have to have a copy of the certain section of your homeowner's insurance. Well, that was like for one of our crime victim assistance providers, she was like, I could never get a client to get me the right information. And so there was somebody else through our team discussion that we were able to try to facilitate being able to just brainstorm. And sometimes it was, depending on the situation, maybe it was that there was, you know, a case manager who would be able to go out and assist them in pulling that information directly, or she learned what the actual like title was. And so she could give the exact language to the victim, so that when they contacted their homeowner's insurance, they could ask for exactly what was needed. And so it's kind of that quid pro quo that like we're able to help each other. And so using that team environment can be a really great way to do that. And we end up seeing that some of those funds are, some of that work that's being done, we see additional funds being returned to the victims because of that. We had New York State, I forgot exactly when it was, but we had a case where you're only eligible for $100 of reimbursement for every instance. And so if somebody, and it used to be up to, I think, 10 instances, and now it's up to 25. And so if somebody went and did there were 5 different times that they went and got a gift card for their, for the scammer, for instance, you have to do 5 individual crime victim compensation applications for those. It's not all in one. That will be changing hopefully in next year, what we're told. But for one of our cases though, there's this other aspect that is called the loss of life savings, which means that you can get up to $30,000 depending on if the individual, depending on the criteria, and this individual that we had met the criteria that we could pursue the up to 30,000. It was initially denied. However, we ended up kind of challenging it and questioning it in terms of the denial. I played naive and I was like, so help me understand, when you came and trained us on this, this is what was shared with us. And she was like, huh, that's a good point. Let me ask. We ended up having a meeting with the general counsel of our Office of Victim Services. And in the end, it did end up getting approved. He was not super thrilled with us in that moment, but we were really excited to be able to get that $30,000 back for that victim. It took a lot of work and it took a lot of challenging in a polite, friendly way, if you will. So just some of the things to keep in mind. So for the coordinator tracking, sorry, I'm just gonna, before I switch topics, any questions? I don't see anything's come through. So on these next 2 slides, and I don't know if you all have the slides yet or when you'll get them, but basically I'm just sharing how I have kept track for myself. So you get to see things like my note to self thing, or this is this is kind of what my Excel spreadsheet looks like. So again, it's helpful to try to track funds that were returned in addition to what was ordered. And when you're doing that, I would encourage you to make sure you're keeping track of what was paid at sentencing if it is a criminal instance. And then also, again, documenting who would be your point of contact for collecting that restitution to update your numbers. When I was just coordinating my 7 counties, this is when annually, because I would be asked, because it's how we got some of our additional funding, it was what was appealing to people. Annually, I would go through my restitution list and see, okay, I'm going to call probation, I'm going to call Ontario probation, and I'm going to see what is the status of the payments that have been made so far. As we continue to expand across the state, it is not realistic for all 18 coordinators to do this. It's not realistic for me as an administrator to do this. And so what we focus on at this point is how much has been ordered and then how much has been repaid at the time of us collecting that information. And so we have adapted that as we've grown as a program. But again, initially it was my CEO was asking me to keep up on those numbers. And so I was contacting, for some of the informal agreements, I was contacting the new power of attorney agent to see how, if payments were continuing to be made so that I could keep track of how much had been returned. But this is just an example of how I, for myself, was keeping track. This example that you have on the screen, I had to redact some of it, but this case was unique because part of it was the victim was due funds, and then the other, there were 2 amounts. One had to go back to the living facility that the victim was living in, and one had to go back to the victim. And so that's just kind of an example of how I was kind of tracking some of that information. And then again, this is so that I could, you know, the last page was the more detailed for me, but then when I was pulling together the numbers for my CEO for when she was doing things, I was able to just kind of quickly aggregate information to give her total. And I was just trying to keep track of some basic information, including if things were court ordered, if they were, you know, if it was through civil court, if it was through criminal court, etc. So just another example of how I was tracking some of that. So that's my contact information. Don't hesitate to reach out if you have any questions, and don't hesitate to reach out a second time if I don't respond. It is no offense, but sometimes I get lost in email. So don't be afraid to bug me if you have the question.
So what questions do you have for Allison? We got some time. I will share that one of the things that one of our advisory board members has done in the past, Paige Ulrey out of King County in Seattle, Washington, talks about a case where what the victim wanted was for the grandson, I believe it was, to be court ordered to attend drug rehab. And so Paige, in her relationship with the judge, was able to get that as part of the sentencing, so that it was able to do what the client wanted. While we go ahead and
Do you want me to stop sharing?
yeah, go ahead and do that, and I'm going to throw up the survey questions. These are totally confidential. We don't know who answers or any of that. Are you seeing them? Okay, good. So go ahead and answer the increased knowledge one. Thank you, Stephanie. And thank you, Kylan, for the gentle reminder. Okay. Did everybody get a chance to answer?
Hey, Lisa, it wasn't working on my end to answer.
It wasn't working on mine either.
Me either.
Yeah, it just showed like results.
Yeah.
Okay.
Zero
And so they
results.
actually told me, like, why are you?
I think I did it too
Yeah.
soon because I practiced it. So let's do this one.
Thanks.
Practice makes perfect.
Yeah, there you go. All right, and the third. All right, thank you so much. I appreciate that, everybody. So running back, any other questions that you might have for Allison around the financial restitution, or any of the, I mean, she's been at this a long time, and if you've got any questions about how we Lifespan was able to grow this program, or any of her stories, there are plenty.
How did you go about getting recruiting a forensic accountant on your in your E-MDT? That's kind of what I'm
Yeah.
with.
So you know, I kind of shared that information about how my previous director had worked with his accountant and that's kind of how he ended up getting into the to share some information with these accounting students. So what ended up happening for us is that somebody had died and left like a small dollar amount of funds to Lifespan that had, it wasn't specifically for like forensic accounting, but it was for like something related to elder abuse that would kind of help pursue a case. And so they ended up utilizing it to pursue a case with forensic accounting. And because of how much help that provided, when we pursued our funding for it was an ACL grant that we initially had, because of the success that we had in that case and how beneficial both law enforcement and the district attorney's office had indicated that it was, we decided to try to include it in our grant application. And that's kind of, we have the enhanced aspect. And so our enhancement is that we have the ability to fund forensic accounting, some geriatric psychiatry, and then also civil legal services. And so what I find though with forensic accountants is that that some of the ones that we're seeing more people kind of pop up across the country that are more interested in specifically related to elder abuse. And so you can kind of try to search around for that. But in addition, I'm surprised by how many of the younger accountants that are coming into the practice that we now contract with that really are finding a passion in the elder abuse world. And so I think being able to make those connections to letting people know that it is an option, it is a field, and making some of those initial inroads can be really beneficial. And then also just seeing like, do you have a school nearby that has an accounting program or has a forensic accounting program that they could volunteer, or you could, have them do a project or something like that, and just trying to make, or even would they be willing to hear an elder abuse presentation, and then maybe broach would you be interested in, volunteering if there's professor oversight and things like that. So I think that's a great way to do that. Especially when there's no budget. I guess I got very specific to no budget.
Thank you. It's just very low.
Yeah. It's tough. We also, as part of our New York State initiative, we had funding at one point that we were able to do some training videos, and we have a video that's about the role of the forensic accountant where 2 of our forensic accountants are interviewed. And so it's available on our website. I don't recall if I had it in the, hopefully I remember to put it on one of the slides, but the website's nysemdt.org. I'll put it in the chat as well. I don't remember exactly what the tab across the top is called, but there's something like videos or training or something like that. And then you can find the role of the forensic accountant video that can give you a better idea of kind of what role they play in elder abuse cases that might help to make you feel more comfortable if you're broaching a conversation with either students, professors, or other professionals that are in the field already.
You can also reach out to your area agency on aging and see if they've got some folks that, oftentimes they have like tax attorneys that are volunteering with the older adults. And sometimes those are the folks that are just wanting to keep their hand in things, maybe already retired, have some time on their hands. You can also talk to the county attorneys and see if there are any folks that are on the county payroll that might be willing to help out on that as well.
Yeah, some of the larger cities have like access to forensic accountants, or even like, I'm trying to think, there was like the U.S. Attorney's Office on a case that we had, they were able to access a forensic accountant, not locally, but through their connections in the U.S. Attorney's Office. And so sometimes they're, again, kind of asking people, do you know anyone, can be a really good resource.
Good question, though. That's one that often folks have trouble with. Anyone else? Are there additional questions?
Can I ask, have any of you had have any of you had success in recovering any funds for any of your cases that you've reviewed thus far?
So in New Hampshire, it's what we routinely ask for. So I work for the Department of Justice. We have two
Okay.
prosecutors. We have two elder abuse prosecutors that cover our entire state. That's where I work. And so we always ask for restitution to be ordered. Two of our recent cases, the restitution was ordered and half of it was paid at sentencing.
That's awesome.
So one of it, the total amount was 82,000 and she paid about 42 at sentencing. Unfortunately, that was to the estate because the victim had already passed away. And the other one, recently, she was ordered to pay 40, two different victims, so 10 and 10, or 20 and 20, and she paid 10 and 10, so
Okay.
at sentencing. So
That's great. That's great that it's kind of a matter of course with you. Any specific challenges that any of you that have not had it happen? For me, sometimes it's just getting law enforcement involved or getting the DA's office interested. I know that's a big barrier for me.
Have any of y'all had any other kinds of restoration that you've, even if it's not financial or some of those informal kind of things, have you been able to work something out so that they can grant the victim kind of more of what they're looking for?
I recently worked with a client in Utah. She was a victim of scammers. But we were able to work collaboratively with her assisted living and a friend of hers and Adult Protective Services to protect the rest of her funds by getting a guardianship. She accepted conservative guardianship to help because she didn't know she couldn't help herself. So it's kind of sad. But yes, we were able to work collaboratively and secure the rest of her funds so that she can live in her facility and apply for support by the end of the year. So she'll have additional support with paying for it. So that was something I was involved in. That was great.
That's good, yeah.
One of the things I had started to collect when I was first starting, but it was never a number that people seem to care about, but me, well, not just me, that sounds a little dramatic, but one of the numbers that I wished was more appealing to funders was how much money we were preserving and protecting. Because I'm like, but look at this, like, because this money isn't taken, this person isn't on Medicaid now, isn't using county resources. And so for a while I was trying to collect, like, this person was about to go onto benefits, but we were able to stop the abuse. And then, it never went anywhere. And I think I was making it a little too complicated with how I was trying to collect it. But it is something that's always really exciting to think about as a coordinator of like, these are the funds that were protected as the result of, your team's involvement and the ability to, so your client can stay in that facility and be able to access the services that she needs.
it's interesting, if I may, that you bring that up, because that's one of the struggles we're having right now is our financial institutions will stop a scam before somebody sends the money because we have a freeze law. So they have the ability in New Hampshire to freeze a transaction for 15 days, and they'll do that. And it's great. We passed that. It went in effect July 1, 2022. those don't end up getting reported further. And so we don't know about it.
Oh,
We don't end up
interesting.
case reviewed. There's no review of those cases because they're never cases
Right.
because they stopped the bleed. So how, that is, how do you, like, I have banks who'll say to me, well, we saved all these millions of dollars because we stopped this person from engaging in this scam, for sending this money to a scammer. But I'm like, how do you count that? If it doesn't
Yeah,
get reported to anywhere, if you're not telling us.
right. That's really interesting.
And a lot of times what happens is they take their money out of that bank and go to a different bank.
I was
But
actually, I was
we
gonna
find that out too. But
I was gonna say,
it's
I'd be interested in those numbers. How many people are like, fine, I'll go elsewhere. And then this bank didn't catch it and didn't freeze it. Like,
yeah. Yeah, and I see, and those do end up getting reported because the second bank typically will report those.
right.
Um, right. But the first bank doesn't
Mhm.
necessarily, and it's not necessarily something I know about until much, much
Right,
later. But how do you, it's something I struggle with. Like, that's a really good question. How do you keep track of that this is what we saved? Like, this is
right.
how we kept the money in this person's pocket. Um, it's pretty difficult to
Yeah.
do that.
Well, and it's almost too bad. I mean, I wonder if there's a way to engage with some of those financial institutions, because typically if somebody has agreed to send money, they're not just being contacted once.
Oh,
You
of
know,
course.
and so is there an opportunity for that bank to recognize the great work of stopping those funds going out the door and still engaging? And I'm not sure of the resources available in your area,
So
but like, so that they can get some education about like scam prevention and things like that. So,
they're all on my team. The my larger team is all mostly financial institutions. I have our number one law, the Bankers Association is so our financial abuse specialty team is a nonprofit. Our co-chair, one is the CEO of a bank, the other is the legislative liaison for New Hampshire Bankers Association.
okay,
So, and I'm doing scam prevention with New Hampshire Banking, so the state agency, like
yeah,
in the next month. I work very, very closely. And so fortunately, but unfortunately, like
yeah,
we have cornered that market as far as they do report, they know how to report. They're reporting the ones where people are losing money. The ones they're not reporting are the ones where
that they're
that
stopping.
they're
Yeah.
stopping.
And
Um,
that's where I wonder if there is a market, if you will, to recognize and to help them understand the ongoing, like, I don't know if you all have ever looked at like a scam baiter video on YouTube. If you haven't, it's very interesting. Jim Browning is one of the very well-known ones, to just see how aggressive these individuals
oh yeah,
are, and how, also how much they go back to people. And so being able to share some of that to see if they would then refer the ones like, great work that you stopped it, and let's stop it, let's give them the tools they need to stop it the next time. And so still
right.
make that referral.
Yeah, so they're actually, if they use the freeze law, if they actually institute the freeze law, and a lot of
Yeah.
times they're stopping these before they have to use the freeze law.
Okay.
They're telling people, this is a scam. They're pulling people aside. They're doing all the things they need to
Right.
do. So they stop it
That's
before
great.
if they use the freeze law, they are then required to report that to to New Hampshire Banking.
Okay.
Um, New Hampshire Banking, though, there's no requirement for them.
To
They
then.
don't have someone like me sitting there. And so, because they're a regulatory
Yeah.
agency. So, so it's interesting. So they're
Yeah.
supposed
It
they
is.
get the reports, but are they keeping track of it's like
Right.
that Seinfeld bit about the reservation, right? Anybody
Yeah.
can take the reservation, but are
Yeah.
you keeping the reservation?
Mhm.
So, so that's the thing. Back to Lisa's question about other mechanisms or other like maybe formal or informal
Mhm.
ways of collecting money. So, and this is all confident. I can't give all the details, but so I am housed at the DOJ, like I said, but our elder unit even though we do criminal prosecutions, we're housed under consumer protection. So our Consumer Protection Bureau at the DOJ can do both civil and criminal. And there have been cases, and at least one, it's one I use as an example of where people didn't talk and they should have brought it to a multidisciplinary team and they didn't, is a case where it was resolved through the Consumer Protection Bureau. So it was a contractor case.
Oh, okay.
And unfortunately, nobody was really looking at it until I started looking at it and went, he got that $10,000 the same time he connected with this other woman and started scamming her. So,
Interesting.
but so there are other ways to negotiate.
Well, why would I get it?
Yeah.
Towers.
So anyway, that one had gotten resolved through, with the initial people had gotten resolved through sort of kind of like a mediation type of thing through our
Yeah.
Consumer Protection Bureau. So
That's great. Very cool.
All right. Well, thanks, everybody. I appreciate it. And you've got Allison's contact info. If you've got any additional questions, she's very knowledgeable on all types of things. And thanks, Allison, for spending your time with us. She's just back from vacation, so hasn't even read through all her emails yet. But we're grateful that you're spending time with us.
Thank you so much for having me, and